morning everybody, and welcome back to the Meadowcraft workshop. What I thought I'd do today is to have a look at reshaping and reclaiming some micro gouges that a very good pal of mine who is taking up wood carving. He actually works in glass, that's his skill set, but he'd like to try wood carving, and over the years he's picked up at car boots and things like that some small chisels which he's tried to hand sharpen without a great deal of success. So what I thought it would be a good test out for my record power 8-inch grinding system, whetstone of course, and see what we can do with reshaping and then bringing to a sharp edge some of these micro chisels. Now I did run into a problem when I started looking at smaller chisels, that the supplied jig for gouges is really a bit bulky. It's great for medium size and the larger chisels that I use, and I did find when I tried to use it on the smaller gouges, it just wasn't fine enough, and I was tending to move around too much on the bar and wasn't getting a constant edge. So what I did is I looked on the market and I came across the Tormek version, which as you can see is split, and that allows it to sit over the bar, so that once you've set the angle using the adjuster on here, it's so much easier to control. Now this may be a problem with my weak hands, but I've got a feeling that this just is going to be better suited. Now it wasn't expensive, which is a bit of a shock for a Tormek jig, so I think it was a worthwhile investment. It has a nice socket here so you can get it in and make sure it's absolutely leveled. So that's what I propose to do, is to reclaim some of these rather beaten up pieces of kit, and as you can see, when you I don't know if that shows up properly, but when you look at that, I mean it's going to be quite something to reclaim that gouge. So let's see how we get on. As I'm going to be looking at quite a misshapen gouge to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rough the stone up using the grader, but before that the stone is already been soaked, so I just need to top it up just a little bit because you want it to run. But what I have found is it's very easy to run it in too deeper water, and that unfortunately causes it to spray everywhere, which is another idea why I adopted the seed tray after some good advice. So the first thing I'm going to do is rough up the stone again to bring it back to a coarse cutting rather than fine grade, because obviously the fine grade it will still do the job, but it'll just take longer. So I'm just going to briefly do that, and of course to make it fine again, it's just basically the same procedure as instead of using the coarse side, you use the smooth side. So I'll do that, then I'll adjust the angles and we'll come back and see how we get on. So before I start anything, I'm just going to flatten off the edge of the chisel, and to do that I'll just hold it square on the inside face. Makes your teeth go on edge, of course. And as this is rather badly shaped, rather than make all my fillings drop out, I'm just going to use a file just to level off. And what I'm trying to do is flatten the metal back so that I have what's called a bar of light. Just turn the machine off. A bar of light, which is going to give me a guide as to how much metal I'm taking off, and also helping me to make sure that I'm doing it completely evenly over the whole of the chisel face. So I'll spend some few minutes doing that, because this is rather hard steel, and it basically it'll just be a case of filing and then addressing the stone just to make sure I get this bar of light. Well, I've ground up a couple. I don't know if you can see that there, but that is flattened the surface, and that's going to help guide me when I'm sharpening, but it also squares up. If you remember, this was rather slanted to one side. It still is, so I'm just going to square that up just a little bit more. This one I've already put into the Tormek holder, and you can see there that I've given it a nice edge to work towards, and it's make the bevel. So the next thing, which is probably the easiest, is to just check the bevel angle, which I know is probably going to be just a little bit, maybe a hair over 20, because these are probably going to be used more for softwood than hardwoods. So I'm just going to check the angle with the record power angle gauge, and I don't know if you can pick that up on the camera, but it is just over 20. If you can see that, just over 20. So when I set the blade up against the stone using the angle set, because it's going to make a hollow grind, because it's a round wheel, obviously, if I set it to 20, that is not going to give me a true angle on the blade. So what they recommend is that you just go to 22, or in some, if it was a larger chisel, you might even consider going up to 25. But as this is small and the effect is not going to be too severe, I've set it to, don't know if you can pick that up, but it's actually just over 20. It's then a case of putting the bar at the correct distance, so that when you put the blade guide up against the tool, that it is at 20, or at the setting. Now I can see there's just a little bit of light under there when I touch it on the stone, the tool, and just the corner is there, so that needs to come out just a hair. and I'm using the micro adjustment on the bar. Now this may all seem just, you know, a bit fiddly, and you could just as easily use the old tried and tested method of a bit of pen on the blade, on the tool itself, and just keep turning the wheel away from the bar until you get a true setting. But as I'm reshaping this virtually from scratch, I thought I would set it as near as possible to the angle guide, and then use the, and I think that is pretty well it. Just, it's flat on the tool. So I think that's as near as the angle is I can expect. But what I am going to do, says he, having found the pen, I'm just going to colour in the back of the tool. I don't know if you can see that. And because I'm going to have to recut this, I'm probably going to turn it back a little bit higher than the shape that's already on there. And I'll run the machine and I'll just see what sort of contact we're making. And remember, this is on the coarse, so it's cutting pretty hard, and it's going to take quite a bit of metal off, so you don't need to press too hard. And you can see that there's still black just near the tip here, and it's taking off the middle. Well, this is because I'm reshaping the chisel and I'm putting the bevel a bit further up the shaft. Let's have a look. Well, that's really cutting the metal down. Now I'm looking at the little light edge. I don't know if this is going to pick that up. It's not always easy to see, but it's come down quite a lot at the wings, but as I would have expected, because I'm reshaping in the middle of the chisel here, it's still some way to go. So that's telling me not to rock it quite so far up to the wings, because we're already there in so much as it's come to an edge. So I just need to reshape the lower areas, and I'm just looking. Well, it's not far off. When I think I've taken most of it off, I'll then smooth down the coarseness of the stone with a view then to creating a much sharper edge. A weeny bit more. As you can see, I mean, it's taking it down quite quickly, although this is a very small chisel, of course. Okay, well, I think that's good enough to soften up the stone, which I'll do that now. And rather than holding it in one position on the stone, by drawing it backwards and forwards, you're avoiding to grind the actual conditioning stone into a shape. Doesn't take too long, but I want it now pretty fine. That does feel very smooth now. So this is a slower process now, because obviously the whetstone is a much finer grade. Right, I don't know if you can see, I mean again it's all at very fine magnification really. You might be able to see the wire edge is starting to come up. The scratch marks are pretty well rubbed out now, so it may be time to move over to the stropping wheel. But before I do that, I'm just going to take the wire off the inside edge. Some carvers don't, and I recognise that, but I do. I find it works better for me. So I'm just creating that little tiny bevel on the inside. Now I've rolled the wire, I don't know if you can see that, I've rolled the wire over to the other side, and if I rub my finger up on it, you can see that it's raised it up. So I'm going to strop that off with the honing wheel, and to do that we just put the machine on again. But before I do that, sorry, I'm forgetting, I'm just going to reverse the bar, because with these very small chisels I'm not going to trust my eye to be able to reproduce the angle. And although that may not seem very important, when you're getting down to these really fine adjustments, you do really want to try and replicate the angle completely. You can do it two ways. You can either use the gauge to judge it, but this wheel is smaller than this wheel, so I would really have to compensate, which you can do on this gauge using a top mark for a smaller wheel, because as this wheel wears down you need to be able to recompensate for that. But what I am going to do is the slightly old-fashioned, I suppose, method of holding the, because I've set the bevel to what I want, so I know that the grind is producing or has produced a 20 or thereabouts bevel. So now I'm just going to lay that on the pad, just give it a spin and see, as you think you can see, that's actually only rubbing near the tip, so I need to just move this out a little bit. Well, of course this is all very fiddly, but if you have a lot of chisels to do, I mean, I wouldn't have redressed the stone, I would have carried on working on the rough stone, reshaping all the chisels, and then move it over. But I'm just doing this all in one, as it were, just to there we are. That really now is produced a nice clean line, and I can put the machine on. And it's just the same procedure. I'm just knocking and polishing off the wire. Now I've already dressed this leather wheel with honing compound and some metal polish which came with the machine. Personally, I prefer the honing compounds, but if you really want a mirror finish, I suppose setting up the polishing compound will produce that. Now that seems to have rocked it over, so I'm just going to put it on the inside here. it's the shaped leather strop that I purchased as an additional buy when I bought the machine. And that is just rolling the wire over from one side to the other. Well, I'm not quite sure whether you'll be able to pick this up on the camera. Well, at least I hope you will. This is some lime, obviously softwood, or a softer wood that most people carve with to start out, and certainly is a good test. I haven't set the angles on the chisels to be too severe, as if I was cutting hardwood, and I think it's just a way of seeing what sort of edge I've managed to get on them. Bear in mind that my hands are still not as steady as I would want, but I think, as you can see from this little flex cut gouge, that it's making a nice clean cut, both across the grain and with the grain. So I'm pleased with that. Is it razor sharp? Yes, it is sharp, and certainly good enough to work with. Would I hone it a bit more? Yes, I think I probably would. This is a little bent gouge which needed a lot of work to reclaim it, so I'm using it to make a deeper trench just around this leaf shape. I think I would give that quite sharp. Certainly, again, I think more strop work is needed. Let's try it. This isn't a veiner, but it's almost. Let's just maybe take this is the Henry Taylor. Just put a little vein in there. And that seems to be cutting very nicely. Let's just go around this detailed edge a little bit. Now, when you consider, as I say, these I think have been used more for puttying and cutting out putty from a stained glass window mould. I think bringing them back from the almost the dead, I think, is produced quite a good chisel. Again, I think I need to spend more time stropping these. The edge is certainly there. It needs more of a strop. There's another one of the slightly more budget chisels. And this one, if you remember, had great chunks out of it. We had to completely reshape it. So that's certainly producing a nice clean cut. And with a bit more time on the strop, I think we would be able to carve with that really quite happily. Let's just I mean, it's cutting across the grain as well as with the grain. Is it making little stop cuts? And appears to be. Let's just make a stop cut by this edge of the nose and just slide up to it and see what we get. I think in conclusion, all of these could do with more stropping, and to be quite frank, I'll probably run them through the grinder just a bit more. Just to really sharpen them up. Now, my slight reservation on the need for honing is more to do with my ability with the whetstone than the actual quality of the work that it's producing, i.e. the edges that it's producing. I think it's just a question of practice, familiarity, and strengthening up my hands a bit.